She limped across the dirt yard in silence, her face bruised, her eyes hollow, and her pain buried so deep. Not even her shadow dared to speak of it. No one in town noticed. No one asked where she came from or what horrors she was running from. But one man did. He was a quiet rancher, a man who hadn't smiled in years, who buried his own past beneath the soil he worked every day. He saw her limp once, and in that moment, everything changed. But what he did next didn't just shake his own world. It shattered the silence of an entire town. Why was she limping? Who were the men watching her from the hills? And why did the sheriff himself tremble when he heard what happened that night? This isn't just a story about pain. It's a story about standing up when the world turns its back. About a silent man who refused to stay quiet when evil came knocking. If you think you've seen kindness, wait until you see what this rancher did for a broken girl. Because when the truth comes out, you won't forget it for the rest of your life. Before we dive in, if stories like this move you, if they make you feel something deep inside, then go ahead and hit that like button. It tells us we're creating something that matters. And if you believe in the power of untold stories, the kind that touch the soul and stay with you long after they're over, make sure to subscribe and follow Legacy Ignited. We bring you true, powerful stories, just like this one, every single week. Now take a breath, because this story, it's going to stay with you. In the remote silence of Dustwood Valley, where the winds whispered secrets and the mountains stood like ancient guardians, lived a man few dared to understand. Rancher Thomas Granger wasn't feared, nor was he famous. He was simply quiet, the kind of quiet that made people curious, then cautious. He spoke little, smiled even less, and carried a sorrow in his eyes like the ghost of someone long gone. He ran his ranch alone after his wife's passing 5 winters ago. Folks said she died in her sleep. Others whispered of something darker, but Thomas never corrected them. He simply worked the land, fed the horses, and lived among the silence like it was a friend. Then came Maria. She was no more than 19, thin, frail, and wrapped in a borrowed shawl that didn't match the dust on her shoes. Sheriff brought her in one morning, saying she needed a roof and some honest work. Said she'd been found outside town, no family, no story, just a name and eyes that didn't trust anything. Thomas looked at her once, then nodded. No words exchanged. That's how things began. Maria worked the kitchen mostly, cleaned, cooked, swept the long wooden halls of the ranch house with quiet obedience. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, but Thomas noticed things, like how she flinched at loud noises, how her hands shook when she held a pot too long, and how she always avoided her own reflection. Then, one evening, as dusk stretched its fingers across the valley, Thomas saw something that shifted everything. Maria limped. It wasn't the kind of limp from tripping or twisting an ankle. This was deeper, painful, like every step dragged a memory behind it. She winced as she carried the feed bucket across the stable yard, biting her lip so hard it bled. Thomas didn't say a word. He watched, heart clenched, fists curled at his sides. And then she slipped. The bucket hit the dirt, grain spilling everywhere. She gasped and dropped to one knee, clutching her ankle. But it wasn't just her leg. Her whole body trembled, like she was fighting back something more than physical pain. He walked over slowly. The horses in the barn grew still, sensing something heavy in the air. "You all right?" he asked, voice low but steady. She nodded too fast. "Yes, sir. Just tired." But when she tried to stand, her skirt shifted, and Thomas saw it. A bruise, purple and raw, wrapped around her thigh like a grip too tight to forget. He said nothing, just held out his hand. She hesitated, eyes wide like a trapped deer. Then, slowly, she placed her trembling hand in his, and he pulled her to her feet. "Leave the feed. Go inside. Rest that leg," he said. That night, something changed. Thomas didn't sleep. He sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames like they held the answers. The ranch had known pain before his own, buried deep. But this was different. This was living pain, breathing pain, and he couldn't ignore it. By morning, he had questions. But Maria stayed silent. Days passed. The limp worsened. Sometimes, she didn't come out of her room until midday. Other times, he found her in the stable long after dark, brushing the horses in silence, as if they were her only friends. Then one night he heard crying, not loud, not the kind meant to be heard, but the soft, choked sobs of someone breaking slowly, trying to stay invisible. He followed the sound to the back barn. There in the straw sat Maria, knees hugged to her chest, blood on her stocking, and tears soaking her sleeves. Thomas knelt beside her. She froze. "Did someone do this to you?" he asked. Silence. "Maria, I need to know." She looked at him then, eyes wide, haunted, and filled with something he hadn't seen before, shame and fear. "My uncle," she whispered. After my parents died, he took me in. But he wasn't kind. I ran. I didn't know where to go." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Did he follow you here?" She nodded slowly. "I saw him in town 2 days ago. He stared at me, smiled, said he'd come back for what was his." Thomas's hands curled into fists. "What's his?" he asked, voice like steel. "Me," she whispered, barely audible. "He said I was bought with a debt, that I belonged to him." Thomas stood. He didn't speak again that night. He simply led her back to the house, locked every door, and sat by the front window until morning, rifle across his lap. Maria didn't see him sleep for 3 days straight. He patrolled the land, watched every trail, every dust cloud on the horizon. And then, one night, just after moonrise, they came. 2 men, one on horseback, the other on foot. They didn't bother knocking. They walked straight up to the porch like they owned it. Thomas stepped outside. Calm, cold, the rifle still in his hand. "You got something that ain't yours," the man on foot said. He was tall, with a snake-like grin and a voice that oozed menace. "I think you're mistaken," Thomas replied. "No mistake. Girl's ours. Family debt. She ran. She's not going anywhere." The man's smile faded. "That ain't your call, rancher." Thomas's finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "You step 1 foot on my land again, and it'll be your last." The 2 men laughed, spat in the dirt, then walked off into the night. But Thomas knew they'd be back, and next time, they wouldn't be walking. That night, Maria sat across the table from him, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to bring this to your home." Thomas looked at her, really looked, not as a maid, not as a burden, but as a soul crying for safety. "You didn't bring trouble here," he said softly. "They did, and I won't let them take you." Outside, the wind howled across the valley, but inside, the fire burned steady. For the first time in years, the silent rancher had found something worth protecting, and the storm was just beginning. That night, while the fire crackled and Maria finally drifted into fragile sleep upstairs, Thomas stood at the window, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the dark hills beyond the ranch. The 2 men had made their threat clear, and Thomas knew predators rarely backed down when they believed someone belonged to them. But she didn't. Not anymore. Not while she had his roof, his word, and his quiet rage boiling just beneath the surface. At sunrise, he went into town. He didn't go to the saloon. He didn't stop by the feed store or tip his hat to the banker. He went straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Cole was an aging man with gray eyes and a spine stiffened by war and law. He looked up from his desk when Thomas entered, slow, deliberate, and deadly calm. "What's wrong?" he asked without pleasantries. Thomas placed a folded piece of paper on the desk. It was Maria's letter, written that morning, trembling hands, every word a piece of her soul. She'd confessed everything, the abuse, the threats, the men's names, and the truth that she'd been treated like property since she was 13. The sheriff read it in silence. When he finished, he let out a long breath. "You know they'll deny it," he said. "I know," Thomas replied. "You know you can't shoot a man unless he crosses that line." "I know." Sheriff Cole looked up. "You planning on them crossing it?" Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sheriff stood. "I'll send a deputy out tonight, just in case." But Thomas shook his head. "No lawman's dying for this. This is my land, my fight." That evening, back at the ranch, Maria stayed inside. She wore one of Thomas's old flannel shirts, It hung off her like armor, too big for her body, but just enough to make her feel safe. Outside, the air thickened. The horses grew restless. Even the dogs barked at nothing. And then they came again. 3 riders this time. Thomas saw them crest the hill just after midnight. No lanterns, no words, just cold silhouettes against a silver moon. He didn't move from the porch. He just waited. The lead rider dismounted. It was the uncle, his eyes wild, teeth yellowed, and hate radiating from every twitch of his face. "I warned you, rancher," he snarled. "She's mine." Thomas stepped forward. "She's not yours," he said calmly. "She's not anyone's, and you're not taking her." "She's a debt," the man hissed. "I fed her, kept her alive. She owes me." "No," Thomas said, leveling the rifle. "You beat her, broke her, and you think that's a claim. But out here, in this valley, that kind of evil gets buried." The uncle spat. "You won't shoot." But Thomas's finger never trembled. The standoff stretched thin, like a wire ready to snap. And then, a sound cut through the night. Bootsteps. Maria. She stepped out onto the porch, her limp more visible than ever, her face pale, but burning with a defiant fire Thomas had never seen in her before. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said to her uncle. He laughed. "You should be." "I was," she whispered. "But I'm not a child now. I don't belong to you. I never did." Something broke in the man's eyes. The illusion of control. The lie he'd lived behind. He reached for his belt. Thomas fired. The rifle's thunder echoed through the valley, scattering birds into the sky. The bullet struck the ground inches from the man's boots, just a warning. The next wouldn't be. The uncle froze, lips trembling. "You'd shoot me over a girl?" "No," Thomas said. "I'd shoot you for trespassing, but I'd bury you for hurting her." Silence. Heavy. Charged. Then the other 2 men, his lackeys, shifted nervously. One turned his horse around without a word. The other hesitated, then followed. The uncle stared at Maria for one last hateful second, then backed away. "This ain't over," he growled. Thomas didn't lower the rifle. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." They rode off into the black, swallowed by the night and the shame of being defeated not by bullets, but by courage. Inside, Maria collapsed into a chair, shaking. Thomas knelt beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were brave. Braver than I ever was." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "Why did you protect me?" He paused, searching for words he hadn't used in years. "Because someone should have protected my wife, and I didn't." Maria's breath caught. "She was beaten too?" she asked. Thomas nodded slowly. "By her brother. Before I met her. She carried it in silence, just like you. And one night, it became too heavy. She never spoke of it, just stopped waking up." The room fell into a long silence. Maria reached out, placing her hand over his. "I'm still waking up," she said softly. He looked at her. This girl who'd limped into his life, carrying more pain than anyone should. And he realized something had changed inside him. The silence he once wore like armor was now being cracked wide open by something far more powerful than grief. Hope. In the weeks that followed, the sheriff made quiet inquiries. Found out the uncle had a warrant in another state. Child endangerment, unpaid debts, and assault. He disappeared soon after, likely fearing a bullet or a badge. Maria stayed. She didn't work as a maid anymore. Thomas refused. Instead, he taught her to ride, taught her to shoot, helped her build strength in that injured leg. The ranch, once haunted by memories and shadows, slowly came alive again. One morning, she stood at the fence line, the rising sun behind her, hair dancing in the wind. Thomas stepped beside her. "Sun feels different today," he said. She nodded. "Feels like it's shining for me this time." He smiled just a little, and for the first time in a long time, so did she. No one ever came looking for her again. And in Dustwood Valley, the story spread quietly about the silent rancher who once stood alone until he found something worth fighting for, something worth breaking the silence. And the sheriff? He never forgot the night Thomas stood guard, rifle in hand, eyes blazing with a fire he thought long dead. It wasn't the shot that shook him. It was the moment a man who'd lost everything chose to protect a girl the world had thrown away. That shook him to his core. Maria began to laugh again, not often, not loudly, but the kind of laughter that comes from remembering you're still alive. The horses sensed it too. They nudged her gently when she passed, no longer guarded, no longer flinching at every touch. Thomas watched her from a distance most days, silent as always. But his silence no longer held the weight of guilt. It held understanding, a quiet presence that let her know she wasn't alone. One evening, she brought him coffee on the porch. "The nights don't scare me anymore," she said softly. He didn't speak, just looked out over the land, the stars above stretching like a blanket of memory. "I used to think pain was my story," she continued. "But now, I think it was just the beginning." Thomas nodded. "We don't choose what breaks us, but sometimes we get to choose what we do with the pieces." She looked at him, her eyes clear, no longer haunted. "You never asked me to tell you everything," she said. "Why?" He thought for a moment. "Because you already told me enough the night you stepped outside." Her lip trembled, but not from fear. This time, it was gratitude. "I think if I had known someone like you existed, I would have run sooner." Thomas turned to her then, truly seeing her, not as someone broken, but as someone rebuilding. "You ran," he said, "and you survived. That's more than most can say." A long silence followed, the kind that doesn't feel empty, but earned. Two souls, stitched back together by shared wounds. Weeks turned into months. Maria stopped limping. Her leg healed slowly, but her spirit faster. She wrote letters, never sent them, just folded them and placed them in a box. Each one was a chapter she was ready to leave behind. One morning, she brought the box to Thomas. "I think I'm ready to burn them." He didn't question it. They walked to the edge of the pasture, where the old fire pit lay beneath the cottonwoods. Together, they set flame to her past, watching the paper curl and turn to ash. When the last letter crumbled, she whispered, "That's the last of him." Thomas looked at her. "No," he said, "that's the first of you." From that day forward, she no longer hid in corners. She rode alongside him, helped run the ranch, made decisions, smiled freely. Townsfolk noticed, but no one asked. Dustwood had learned to respect what grew from silence. Maria kept a journal now, not about pain, but about peace. And every entry ended the same. "He didn't speak much, but when the world turned its back, the quiet man heard my scream." Years later, when Thomas passed, peacefully, in his sleep, under the same stars he used to watch, Maria buried him beneath the cottonwoods. No stone, just a wooden post with one word carved deep: Protector. And in that quiet valley, his legacy didn't echo with gunshots or rage, but with the soft steps of a girl who learned to walk again, without fear. If this story touched your heart, even for a moment, thank you for staying till the end. Every view, every like, every comment, it means more than words can say. Here on Legacy Ignited, we don't just tell stories, we give voices to those who were never heard. And you, by watching, are part of that mission. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Until the next story, stay kind, stay brave, and never forget the power of quiet courage.